Good evening and welcome to Plain Talk. My name is Christopher Ram and it's great to be with you once again. A few weeks ago, a magistrate refused a Guyanese citizen access to the courts of Guyana. That issue has caused considerable doubt and concerns among sections of our community and country that recognize that Guyana is a secular state. That is, it is not identified with any single religion. It has translated non-discrimination to a fundamental right, as indeed it must do. Guyana also has an Prevention of Discrimination Act, and there are several provisions of our Constitution and the laws that are designed to prevent discrimination. So this evening on Plain Talk, I have three persons who will discuss for us the issues of discrimination as it is practiced in Guyana in violation of the country's constitution, which is described in the constitution itself as the supreme law, and which states no law can violate the constitution. And on the issue of the magistrate, it is interesting to point out that the constitution itself provides and imposes on Parliament, the government, the courts, and all other public agencies a duty to be guided in the discharge of their functions by the principles set out in the chapter of the Constitution, and further provides that Parliament may provide for any of those principles to be enforceable in any court or tribunal. Let us begin the discussion by introducing our guest this evening, starting from my left and moving further away. Twinkle, Ms. Vander Radzik, and Mr. Joel Simpson, all of whom are known to be active in civil society in Guyana. Welcome to Plain Talk.
Thanks for having us, Chris.
Perhaps I should start with you, Twinkle. You were involved in this incident. Tell us what happened.
Well, I had matters before magistrate court in court number 6, where I am a transgender. I attended court in female attire, and when I attended court, the magistrate refuses to listen to my cases, and just instead of listening to my cases, he just put me out of the court, saying that, well, as long as I don't come here in male attire, he will not allow me in the court. And every time I attended court, he puts me out of the court.
Were you represented by attorney when this happened?
Well, first I was not, but as I was sitting on the second time, he requested that an attorney come to represent me. So on the day, I think it was the 21st of March, an attorney did came on behalf of myself from SASOD, and he was not given the opportunity to represent me, because when my case is called up and I stood again in female attire, the magistrate said, I warned you on many occasions not to come here with female attire, and please get out of the court, even though I had my attorney sitting there with me.
Finally, give me your thoughts on this.
Yes, well, Chris, thanks for having us here, and it's outrageous. it's like beyond outrageous. It's sort of foolish as well as outrageous. Because A, you just quoted the Constitution. I have some other instances here, and recently from the High Court and certainly the Caribbean Court of Justice, etc., that speaks to the contrary of the magistrate's action. Furthermore, I believe it must be out of order if a citizen is there in the court and she has a lawyer with her to represent her, why it is that with the full force of this procedure, a magistrate would still see fit to put anyone out of the court. And may I just say, Chris, this thing about attire, doesn't say it's foolishness. You know, all over the world, I think the magistrate maybe can offer some fashion magazines, I don't know, but even high fashion, the Paris couture, you have women wearing tuxedos and bow ties and dressed in smoking pants and things like this. So it's just foolish on every count. Furthermore, a transgender woman has every right to dress as how she identifies herself in terms of gender. I remember, if I could say, there was a case similar to this some years ago, and I remember when the lawyers came to present the case. I think it was a Caribbean meeting, and actually the one woman lawyer who was there came completely dressed in male attire with suit and tie to make a point further. So I really think, we have real huge massive issues in Guyana that require justice to be dispensed and justice to be accessed, and it is matters like this which, in my own opinion, trivialize what the courts of justice in Guyana are intended to do.
Yes, sir?
Yes, Chris. Well, SASOD has been involved in this issue for a number of years. So, as you may know, there's a provision in the Summary Jurisdiction Act which, in effect, purports to criminalize what is called cross-dressing. The provision basically says that it's an offense for a man to appear in female attire or for a woman to appear in male attire in any public way or public place for an improper purpose. We first, at SASOD, became aware of this provision in May 2006 when Petronella was arrested and charged, and we did some advocacy on state radio at the time. Then in 2009, there were a series of crackdowns. February 2009, over a 48 period, where at least 7 transgender persons were arrested for cross-dressing. So what we did, in a period of over a year, we organized with partners, including the University of the West Indies Rights Advocacy Project, with the legal academics there, with local pro bono attorneys, including Gino Passard, Nigel Hughes, and Miles Fitzpatrick, and with the transgender community itself, to document these cases. During the crackdown, people were held in custody without access to phone calls, legal representation. They were physically and sexually abused while in detention.
All of which are separate violations of people's rights.
Of human rights of itself.
Absolutely.
Yes.
So a year later, in February 2010, actually, on the eve of the World Day of Social Justice, we filed a case with 4 of the persons who were victims of that crackdown and SASOD, challenging the constitutionality of that law, which purports to criminalize cross-dressing. In September 2013, Justice Ian Chang, acting, gave a judgment on sitting as the Constitutional Court, which in essence basically said that cross-dressing itself is not a crime unless it's for an improper purpose.
Which merely restated the law.
More or less, because the term improper purpose of itself is used in the Summary Jurisdiction Act,
That's
in that
right.
provision which purports to criminalize cross-dressing. But what was even more problematic about, so there's several things. There's a good side, the glass is half full and half empty. What's good is that
When it comes to violation of your constitutional rights, there is no half.
right. So what I'm saying is that we view it as a partial victory because on the face of it, Chief Justice Chang was saying, cross-dressing is not a crime. That's the very first thing he said. But then he added this problematic proviso, which says, unless or but for an improper purpose. But the term improper purpose is not
But
defined.
let's deal
But
with the
the
context in which we're talking.
Yeah.
Twinkle was going to court. This is about access to justice,
Exactly.
and not a constitutional right.
Exactly.
But also in this same the same case that Joel is quoting on this paper I have in front of me goes on to say the same Justice Chang's ruling. It goes on to say it is only if such an act is done for an improper purpose that criminal liability attaches. Therefore, it is not criminally offensive for a person to wear the attire of the opposite sex as a matter of preference, or to give expression to, or to reflect his or her sexual orientation. Now, to me, that is the crux of the matter. There, it is stated in the judgment ruling.
Yeah.
And if Twinkle, look at how beautiful Twinkle looks. If Twinkle decides to go to court dressed as how she is as a person, well, hello, what is wrong with that?
Right.
That's what I was challenging to the
Yes.
magistrate, that I'm not dressed improperly, nor I'm not for here from the improper purpose, so I will not come out of female attire.
Yeah, she she's a beautiful woman and she chooses to dress in that way. What is the problem, Chris? You know, look, you know, it gets to the point where citizens, especially people like ourselves, defenders of human rights and so on, you just want to it's very difficult to remain calm or to remain in any way not wanting to express in the strongest possible terms what is absolutely and totally wrong with this. And Chris, this is one particular case, transgender, but there are so many other cases where magistrates are not familiar enough with the law.
But how can you have magistrates?
But this is it. I'm on the Women and Gender Equality Commission, and we went to the various persons, all of them in the last administration, to make several points and cases to them. One is that magistrates, and I would say even judges in this country, they need to have something where every year or every couple of years they have to pass some kind of exam to show that they are up to date with the laws, like doctors.
Vanda, look, the law is there, it's stated, it's written in English. You're free to do it.
Yes, you know, so in other words,
it prohibits both male from wearing the attire for an improper purpose. That's the only prohibition.
Right. And what is the improper
but
purpose?
Improper purpose, I don't
so this is the
understand what that
problematic
can be.
nature. So this is the problematic nature, I think, of Chang's decision. That improper purpose is used in the legislation itself.
Yes.
It's not defined under the Summary Jurisdiction Act. There's no case law or precedent where this term improper purpose was discussed in terms of what it means, examples, reasons, and even in the case of the crackdowns, Chang did not say what circumstances or reasons gave rise to an improper purpose that may have justified the arrest.
Yes.
So this is why we are challenging Chang's decision before the Court of Appeal.
Yes, and take it as far as it needs to go, because, as I said, it has no basis in the law. It has no basis under the rubric of fundamental human rights. And it certainly has no basis in the particular case of Twinkle.
Why? Sorry, go on.
I said that much must be clear. Whatever improper purpose or purpose may or may not mean, it couldn't possibly mean accessing the court for justice to either, in some instances, defend yourself in matters in which you've been accused, or to seek justice where you've been wronged yourself. It couldn't possibly mean accessing the
Joel,
courts.
you know, I don't even, you see, my problem is we're giving this thing a lot of very serious intent, and it is just crass ignorance and foolishness. And you cannot, I mean, if that is part of our laws of Ghana, then I think there's something badly lacking, because that phrase there is completely subjective. It has no content or context. It has nothing. It is just swimming, you know, like a lost fish there. And this is the kind of foolishness that allows citizens of Guyana. This is just one example in these wording that continually prevents access to justice and convictions and access to the law being there to protect citizens for their rights.
You know, and that's part of the contradiction or the irony, because we have programs going at the level of the courts about access to justice, because every citizen, that's one of your fundamental rights. And here it is, a magistrate How can you explain this? Surely the magistrate did not have a difficulty with reading the act. It's written fairly clearly, even if subjectively. How could, in the 21st century, with all that is swirling around the world, in cases in developed countries, in other third world countries, where this question of rights, civil rights, and the
And civil liberties.
freedom of people to choose, how can we, in this day and age, and when I pose that question to you, because we've been around for a while in civil
Yes.
society,
Yes, we have.
fighting
this.
for
Yeah.
basic human
Yeah.
rights.
Well, it also, let me tell you, that the Constitution, there was an attempt, as you know, to reform it. I see you have the late Haslin Paris's
Version of it,
magnificent, very good handbook near to you. Now, this new government is here. They promised that they would have constitutional reform and so on and so on. In my own opinion, that should have been one of the number one priorities that they should have been looking at. We should have already had the Constitution Commission or whatever it is already set up, and we should have begun literally from day one on something that has been pending and which the current government, to its credit, lobbied strong and hard for, and it is emblazoned in the APNO AFC Constitution. Because Chris,
it's emblazoned in the 100-day plan.
because Chris, all of that. These kinds of anomalies that we're having here. This is, and I said this is one.
You're putting
These
it
are
mildly.
things-
You're putting it very mildly. This is not an anomaly.
Well,
this is a crude violation
Yes,
of people's rights.
It's a violation, and it is also ignorant. So this kind of thing has to be put to rest. It has to be, and of course, in our the fundamental rights section of the Constitution, which was scuttled the last time around, in up to when this thing was happening in 2003, that. Absolutely, in the fundamental rights, you have to have the fundamental rights for sexual orientation
And gender identity.
and gender identity.
But
This is
equal-
fundamental.
But equal protection and benefit of the law
Because
covers that.
under the-
whether you have the term sexual
Yeah.
orientation or not.
Because under the Discrimination Act, which is one of our oldest pieces of legislation, to Guyana's credit, it is very clearly and unambiguously stated there. So so if our rule of law, if our officers of the court are violating what is this fundamental, it's like the bedrock of all of our other laws, especially concerning citizens' rights. So,
Chris, let me say something about the Constitution and the PDA and what SASOD's position is. SASOD actually started in 2003 as a response at the time to the discussions that were taking place about whether sexual orientation should become grounds for discrimination in the Constitution. And that was something that was recommended by the Constitution.
Whether it should become
a
grounds
ground for
for
discrimination.
yeah.
Yeah. So we have the grounds listed. So you have race and political affiliation and religion.
gender.
grounds for
and so-
non-discrimination.
And
For
not-
for
non-discrimination,
non-discrimination,
yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
all those grounds.
Right. So the 1999 Constitution Reform Commission, as some of the new grounds they were recommended, included sexual orientation. In 2001, the Parliament at the time passed it unanimously, right? And when it was reported that some of the new grounds included religion, marital status, and sexual orientation, there were sections of the religious community which gave objection. And they started to zero in on particularly on sexual orientation after a while.
But
Chris, I just wanted, at the beginning you said Guyana is a secular state.
that's correct.
We are not, we hope, a police state, and we are not a religious police state.
Right.
We are not. It is a secular state that we are under. The current minister, in fact, suggested that instead of the Christian prayers in the school or whatever, that you have a thing where everybody makes their own prayer to whichever god or goddess
Silent
they
prayer.
wish. Yes, because it was, some persons would have felt, and you know that there has been the Hindu and Muslim who have said, well, why is all the children saying Christian prayers? This is not our religion. And the Baha'i, who are rarely mentioned, or the Rastafari, but these are also significant religions in Guyana. We are secular. They all exist, and they should all have equal status and rights.
As well as the atheists and the agnostics.
Yeah, exactly.
how do persons in the LGBT community feel they are treated in our society?
Well, given the actions that the magistrate has taken against me, is a perfect example of what's happening for LGBT people. And when it comes down to a person like us, it have a lot of effects. Sometimes you either will in the court. I had a friend. He should want to run away. Who I was accused with me in a matter. She had wanted to run away and don't care what happened, and this can also be a negative effect on her life, where she can be sentenced behind her. But it's due to the magistrate's action. It leads to a lot of things. We kind of with this how the magistrates have reacted, and from all the rejection and degradations that we face, who we always keep ourselves behind closed doors. We always try to not be seen, try to just be away and just be in our own little world. And this sometimes and most times affect us a great lot, because what we need to know, or what's there for us, we do not actually get used to, because of what society thinks or what people put out for us. So we just shade away from what's naturally ours.
SASOD's position on this, and views on how the persons in these communities are perceived
There's grave levels.
and treated.
Yeah, there's grave levels of social discrimination, humiliation, and harassment of LGBT people in Ghana, especially transgender people. For the last couple of years, Chris, there have been a number of very brutal murders of transgender people in particular happening.
Yes.
And many of these murders have gone unsolved. Nobody has been arrested.
Yeah.
Nobody has been
Yeah.
charged. Every sector of life, people face discrimination. In the schools, there's bullying. There's homophobic and transphobic bullying, which we realize results in most transgender people dropping out of school in secondary school, especially when they start to go through that transition and puberty and realize that they might be transgender and so on. So they drop out of school. So many of them haven't finished school. No, you haven't finished school, you haven't written CXC and so on. Your employment opportunities become very limited. So it drives many transgender people to sex work. Now, there's this perception that trans people are obsessed with sex, and that's why they all voluntarily choose sex work as a profession. That is not true.
No.
The options, the economic options are very limited. The employment options are very limited because of the poor educational outcomes which result from homophobic and transphobic bullying. So that affects other rights. So if your right to education is affected, your right to work is affected. There's great discrimination in just moving about in terms of your freedom of liberty. The experiences about access and using public transportation. In fact, one of the matters that Twinkle was defending last month and going to court stemmed from a transphobic attack. She was in a minibus, and somebody in the minibus hit her with a bottle, got down to the bus park to make a report at the police outpost, and was further attacked. She ended up in a conflict and was defending herself, and the attacker was injured. And that was one of the matters that she was dealing with in court. So how do you access justice when you face hate crimes and bias violence if you can't even get to the courts as who you are as a trans person, right? So I think there's a great deal of prejudice in terms of attitudes and so on that need to change, but the laws themselves institutionalize these kinds of prejudice. And the institutions like the courts are now reinforcing that prejudice by telling people you can't come to court.
In violation of their duty.
In violation of the human rights, equal treatment before the law, equal treatment and benefit and protection of the law, and equality before the law.
And it goes to, I think if you do a listing, it would go to all of those things. I mean, as you said, the right to work, right? The right to freedom of movement, the right of association, all of those fundamental things, and expression.
Freedom of expression.
Right? All of those things at one fell swoop are there. You know, Chris and Twinkle and Joel, just relatively recently, earlier this year, the United Nations Development Program, every year they do a human development report. And this year, I was asked to facilitate a number of focus groups to look at the status of rights and development in Guyana. One of the focus groups was in fact held at SASOD with a group of persons that were members of or associated with the SASOD movement. And it was extremely instructive for me, and it's gone into our report. The level of personal affront the level of persecution, you'd have to use that word, that so many of those young men and women and trans in that room were facing. It actually, much as I know about it, was informed, it is hearing the personal stories of what happens that is extremely affecting. And for each of those persons that spoke, there ought to be actually a court case. And so I'm hoping, that there is some, priority given to this matter in the Caribbean Human Development Report. I believe that Jamaica and others have had similar focus groups. And I'm hoping that when the SASOD, which is the Convention Against Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, and it is due to be, it's either April or May this year, and I sincerely hope that in that report, the government and or the shadow report brings to the attention of SASOD what, if any progress has been made, it needs to report on this matter of SASOD with regard to sexual orientation and identity. And if there has been no progress or matters like this are going to be reported, then the shadow report should certainly take it up and with great, very strongly and very firmly have it stated at the SASOD review of how Guyana is progressing in the matter of that particular convention, because it falls quite under it.
Yeah, let me share that SASOD is engaged in the Ministry of Social Protection to report on these issues in the State Party report. In 2012, we also submitted what's called a shadow report on lesbian, bisexual, and transgender people's rights to SASOD, and attended the review, and we're also going to be preparing a shadow report this year. So we intend to see it addressed as well at the level of SASOD.
Excellent.
Yeah, we talking about the court and the church, because the churches, I think the Christian community and the Muslim community got together and caused Jack View quite improperly. That was improper. A unanimous decision by the National Assembly to amend the laws. And yet, I think you will remember Justice Sachs, who came to Guyana.
Albie Sachs from South
Albie
Africa.
Sachs, that's correct.
During our constitution reform.
And this is what he said. And he was talking about this is a marriage case of same-sex marriage. And he said the function of the court is to recognize the sphere which each inhabits, not to force the one into the sphere of the other. He goes on to say, majoritarian opinion, which is what we're talking about our society, this homophobic space that we live in, can often be harsh to minorities that exist outside the mainstream. And he goes on to say, it is precisely the function of the Constitution and the law to step in and counteract rather than reinforce unfair discrimination against a minority.
Exactly.
Now this is one of the world's top judges on constitutional matters. And this is a decision that came out of the Constitutional Court of South Africa.
Yes, and he was one of those people actually who fought on the side of anti-apartheid and actually lost an arm. Defending
a white South African.
Yeah, white South African guy was one of the one a leading person in that anti-apartheid movement.
So why do you think? And please get into this conversation. Why do you think the churches are allowed such a dominant, almost arrogant role in setting social norms and in fact depriving people of their constitutional rights? Why do you think it's happening?
But I think we talked about that, Chris, and I think that this is a secular state, and frankly they're out of order, and they need to be, they have the right, all the churches and the various religions, they have their right to promulgate their beliefs, to have freedom of association, freedom of movement, freedom to this and that, and they should then allow, as Christians and as Muslims and as Hindus and as all faith people, they should be also allow others to do likewise. Listen, Chris, I've always said that the Jesus I know, I come from a Catholic Christian background, I would say that the Jesus I know was a man, and he was a historical figure who associated with the wretched of the earth. right? He was always seen and written about in the New Testament in the company of those that would be the marginalized, those who were the discriminated against, those who were the poor and powerless. That is who he associated with. He didn't associate with the powers of the then religion. In fact, they ended up crucifying him. So, this is a person, if we want to talk reality here, it always bothers me that people are not emulating someone like Jesus the Christ, or someone like the Buddha, or someone like the heroes in their own holy books.
I'm glad you mentioned that.
Yes.
In the Buddha.
So, Chris, I don't even want to. I mean, they have
No, but-
their
but
rights
that-
and freedoms,
but-
but they cannot be above the law and infringing other people's rights under the law.
That is in fact what they did in the year 2001.
Let me say this, Chris. I don't like to paint the Christian and Muslim community entirely with the same brush, because there have been denominations which have made clear that their position is against discrimination,
Yes.
and increasingly over the years. At the time, it was the evangelical and Pentecostal section of the Christian community was very vocal against this law, and CIOG in particular from the Muslim community. But at the same time, the Catholic Church came out in support of including sexual orientation as grounds for discrimination. A little late, but in support, and has been increasingly supportive over the years of these issues under the leadership of Bishop Francis Allen. The Presbyterian Church, many leaders of the Presbyterian Church, particularly Reverend Patricia Sheraton Bisnott, who's the executive director of the Ghana Responsible Parenthood Association.
And the moderator of one of the Presbyterian
Church, the first female reverend in Guyana, and has been speaking out. And increasingly, at the time, there was an Islamic scholar at the Islamic school there at on United Nations Place, who joined us, if you could remember, Vanda, on programs saying this is against Muslim theology to punish and to attack people and so on, and was very supportive and so on.
And we've had Hindu scholars come down. I went to something at Hotel Tower. Arvel Khan and Mike James, actually, a deacon of the church, also chaired that. And that is where Hindu scholars also showed, where this is groundless in terms of their own beliefs.
In fact, in the Bhagavad Gita,
I can say for the Catholic, I have over a few years now I'm attending the Brigham Cathedral and the 12 o'clock masses in female attire. I also had conversations with the same Bishop Francis Allen, because I grew up as a Catholic child also, and then when I bring it was this time, I think it was against the same amending the laws as it relates to same-sex, when they had this Jamaican person in St. Stanislaus compound where I meet Bishop Francis, and I asked him if he's against gender equality and sexual orientation. He said there's no problem. He even asked to meet with us and discuss some of our issues and these things. So from then I attended church, and I used to be not going to church because I was always thinking that I'll be discriminated against or this, but when I was told by Bishop, well, it's okay, I can come to church and there's no problem. I attend church, I go as a normal citizen. I don't get any problem in Brigham Cathedral or no other Catholic church.
That's to the credit of the Catholic Church.
I wanted to say something about Hinduism, that in fact in the Bhagavad Gita, there's a scripture, there's a provision that talks about man, woman, and the third gender. So in particular, you'll find in Hindu societies that the recognition and appreciation of the third gender stems from their theology itself. So we've had many Hindu leaders, Swami Akshanandan in Guyana, and a number of Hindu leaders who have spoken out in support of these rights at SASOD events, participating and so on.
Let's turn. I think we've established neither in law nor in the Constitution, which is the supreme law, can there be any justification, and you're suggesting as well in many religions. Despite the clarity in which this whole issue has been articulated, stated, and again I want to go back to Justice Sachs. He said in paragraph 95 of that decision, the hallmark of an open and democratic society is its capacity to accommodate and manage difference of intensely held world views and lifestyles in a reasonable and fair manner. The objective of the Constitution, i.e., the South African Constitution that he was speaking about, is to allow different concepts about the nature of human existence to inhabit the same public realm, and to do so in a manner that is not mutually destructive, and that at the same time enables government to function in a way that shows equal concern and respect for all.
Yeah, great.
How do we, now, how does SASOD, how the organizations with which you're associated, Vanna, how do we get this thinking, this knowledge, this obvious state into practice?
Right.
Well, we have some codes. The Caribbean Justice Court has a code 5.1 provides that a judge shall strive to be aware of and to understand diversity in society and differences arising from various sources, including but not limited to race, color, sex, religion, national origin, caste, disability, age, marital status, sexual orientation, social and economic status, and other like causes. You know, it's there in our highest court of justice in the region.
How do we get that?
Constitutional reform, Christopher, my dear, constitutional reform, which is overdue and which we were promised, you mentioned in the first 100 days, but we now have 5 years. And it really needs to be made an absolute priority, because this is one very, very pressing issue, but there are others. There are others to do with gender, there's to do with child protection, there are plenty other things that are still amiss in our current constitution, and which absolutely needs to be rectified.
I think we need to do a menu of things. Constitutional reform is very important, as well as reform.
But the Constitution already says there must be no discrimination.
But I think the Constitution needs strengthening as well, Chris. Even in that non-discrimination clause, it's important to include sexual orientation and gender identity.
Yes.
Because that will be a very specific prohibition that will apply to particular social issues
And it will
and
close
social
any
sectors.
of the ambiguities and this
Exactly.
Let us be
foolishness that is
realistic.
going on at
Let
the
us be
moment.
realistic. You tried it in 2001. It did not happen. Which segment of this society, of this government, of this parliament, you see has the courage to bring such a legislation?
Well, the Prime
Chris, I
Minister has
think
been,
so.
the Prime Minister, to be fair, the Prime Minister, Moses Nagamoto, has been speaking about it for the last couple of years, even in the campaign and even while in government, that the issue of including sexual orientation as ground needs to be revisited, and he's been the leading, I think, government voice on that issue when it comes to constitutional
But
reform.
there have been others, I would say, actually on both sides. And the thing is that you have to have, Chris, you have to continue to hold optimism for Guyana, for our country, for my country and my people. For all of what's going bad, you have to continue. That is why we are here in this program. That is why all of us here are going to continue to stand up and defend rights. But even when you have the constitutional reform and it's emblazoned, so-called in the rule of law, etc., you need a whole bunch, as Joel said, a menu of other things to go on. You need to have, Chris, human rights education in schools.
But you don't have it at the level of the magistracy.
But can we park them one side?
No, you can't.
Because, Chris,
You can't.
But Chris, if you have this menu and you begin to have some serious human rights education beginning in schools, in the couple generations to come, there will be less, it is more than likely, there will be less of this foolishness that can prevail in Guyana. There will be less bullying, there will be more tolerance, there will be more acceptance, and children need to know human rights. The children need to be aware in a children's way of what are the laws that protect them well.
The reality is this. In most countries, whether you're talking about South Africa, you're talking England, Australia, Canada, the United States of America, those changes didn't come about by constitutional changes. They came about by challenges in the courts.
Yes, well, you're coming to a good point now. We don't
Strategic
challenge.
litigation.
Yes,
That's
absolutely.
what. Yes.
I agree with
because
you.
unless, and
Yes.
I know this is not for me to express my opinion, but if the PPPC and the APNU plus AFC are genuinely serious, why don't they have an open vote, a conscience vote in the National Assembly on this matter?
Yes, well, exactly.
Well,
Why
our
not? I
position-
hope they're listening, and they will maybe, we take that. Maybe, and again, you have the private members' questions. We don't, as citizens, we don't use. I don't think we use the parliamentarians enough, and maybe we should all step forward and have some of these things raised in Parliament and make exactly that recommendation to go forward. Why not? And you need all the public education to go on. You need SASOD bravely all the
Got
time
it.
there, and Rainbow people and whoever they are, forwarding, supported by a number of the human rights based organizations.
And I'm
me
glad
just
you
say-
accept that, because the US, all those social changes came about because of the Supreme Court, not Constitution.
Right.
Talking of the
Well-
US, sorry.
Well,
to-
what I
to-
must say from what the magistrate has did with the incident with the magistrate, we're not leaving it there. And with myself, I'm starting the action to bring about a change to this same law that the magistrate has acted on. And we're not leaving it there. And also my organization that I represent, Ghana Trans United, is also fully backing or supporting me in this issue and helping me to get
Good.
forward.
Well, good
And
for
they
you.
are
That's
very
that's
good.
There are
extremely
actions
commendable.
that
Very
we're
good.
taking, but we're starting from the bottom of the step until we shall reach
Right.
to somewhere at the top.
Yeah.
But we are taking actions, and the movement
Because
doesn't stop.
Action is required.
Right.
Even though the issue that the magistrate had thrown my cases out of court, they're dismissed. Yes, that's good, but still the issue is not solved. Where transgender persons are not allowed to get into the
Yeah,
court,
so
and then
carry on.
there are also issues where a transgender woman, was not attending the same court I was attending, and she was not even able to go and access the court that she's supposed to be attending.
I had a conversation with Joel some time ago. Why not approach the Chancellor about
Yeah.
this?
Yes.
We're writing the Chancellor and the Chief Magistrate.
I spoke with
about
you
it.
some time ago. You should
It
have
is-
done it already.
yeah.
Yeah,
And
we're just
but
waiting on our
it's
attorneys to
already-
sign off on the
You know
letter.
what? Right. Fair enough. But go as a delegation as well, and sit there. Go with the letter as a delegation as well to reinforce, that the spoken word in
Yeah.
his presence.
Yeah,
with
very
these
useful
matters.
And these
point.
people
Another
could be
thing,
very
Chris,
reasonable,
Yeah.
You
Getting back to the
they could be
menu, though.
persuaded.
But
Yeah,
can
yeah.
I just say something else too? It was pointed out to me recently that Guyana also, we have no particular history in class action, bringing class action suits. And for instance, this would certainly be a case. I think there are several others, but it's something we need to consider as citizens. And we need to find, I'm not sure if it's permitted under our law, I would imagine so, but it is another avenue that maybe we should pursue as citizens, the class action type of suit.
There's a provision that was included in 2003 when we had the reforms, which allows an organization, they call it public interest or social interest litigation, which allows an organization on behalf of its constituents, so to speak, to bring an action.
Oh,
And that's how
great.
SASOD
Yeah,
was
right,
able to
right,
bring the
right.
case
In
in
that-
2010
in
in that
2010.
context.
Well
But getting
done.
back to the menu,
Yeah.
Chris, I think strategic litigation is very important. That is where you bring cases where you use the general human rights law, where Parliament is failing to give you specific laws, like sexual orientation being a ground of non-discrimination itself. You use the equality provisions and you bring cases. We are discussing, exploring whether it's strategic to bring this particular case here that happened last month with Twinkle, whether we should sue. We are discussing that.
Okay.
Efforts related to public education are also very important. We need to do mass media education, and the government really has the duty to educate the people. That's one of the
That's correct.
Yes,
one of the
That's correct.
responsibilities of the
Yeah.
government when it comes to human rights.
Yeah.
And we're working with various ministries to get programs started, to get involved in doing some of this work. We've been meeting and having discussions with the Ministry of Social Protection. Chris, ordinary legislation, not just the Constitution, ordinary legislation needs reform. The provision, it would end all of this if the provision in the Summary Jurisdiction Act was just repealed. There's also 3 provisions in the Criminal Laws Offences Act, sections 351 to 353, which in effect criminalize same-sex intimacy between men in private, adult men in private. We want those provisions repealed as well, because although there
Absolutely.
isn't, for consensual behavior, prosecutions actually happening, we know there's a great deal of extortion by the police.
When I say litigation, you don't necessarily need Parliament to to change that legislation. You can go to court and ask the court to
Read down the
deem
law.
those provisions unconstitutional.
Right. And that is what we're doing in the cross, just in
that's
case
what
that
they're
we're
taking
appealing.
this forward.
With the Chief Justice ruling, wasn't that something that could have bring down the law?
Yes.
But
Yeah.
they said it's not well, in my opinion, what I would say it's not a valuable something. It doesn't
No,
have
it's
no
not.
value. That's because if it had value, the magistrate would not have done what he had done, and the chief magistrate also encouraged it in some kind of way, because we also had wrote it her from GTU perspective, and she said that she didn't find any grounds where the magistrate is being discriminating or is showing prejudice or transphobia. So then the matter of cross-dressing had already been to the court. The Chief Justice had already handed down his ruling, but they're then saying that the laws have not been changed. So then the Chief Justice ruling has no meaning or no value. That's what they're trying to say. But I'm asking from you, what is the value or the meaning? Or you, in the case where the magistrate had not allowed my attorney to defend me, what
well,
would you do?
listen,
What would you have done
He's
if you
asking
was
for
my
your legal
attorney?
advice.
Yes.
What would you have
I
done
don't
if
like, I
you were
don't like
my...
to give legal advice on television. But you don't even need to have an attorney to appear in court. You can be your own attorney.
Yeah, but
Absolutely.
I
Yes, but it
asked
helps.
the magistrate, I said, can I ask you something or can I tell you something? And he said no. But if I had continued to talk, but the magistrate was cooperating very well with his court orderlies. So on the final day of the issue, this time I didn't even get the chance to enter into the courtyard as much.
And I should say this. We have a hierarchy of courts. Starting with your magistrate's court, you have your high court, you have your court of appeal, and you have the CCJ.
Yeah.
The decisions of the high court bind the lower courts. That's how it is.
Right.
Yes, but then it didn't bind the magistrate mind.
I think it's
no.
I think my own view is because of this problematic proviso, but for an improper purpose. If we had a clear, complete
No. But in this case, in the case of Twinkle, being denied access, that has nothing to do.
Yes, precisely. You
And
know,
then
With
what,
improper purpose.
what
Yes.
is the improper purpose
Exactly.
attending court?
Twinkle
How could
and Chris and
attending
Joel,
court be?
improper purpose is foolishness. It just
The
you know, let us
magistrate's
don't. I
behavior is
don't want to
improper
give us.
purpose.
I would say so. Don't let us give that very foolish phrase more credit or more exposure than it is. It is foolishness. It just needs to be expunged from whatever this is, and let's get down to the. Let us get down to the defending and protecting of people's fundamental rights, which is what the court is for. That's their only business. They're not to decide on fashion or apparel
Because
or
even-
use
even
of clothes.
now-
Come on.
Even before this incident with me and the magistrate, the police has threatened on many occasions to charge me and other friends across the city.
Just a bunch of ignorance.
But
And when we try to defend it that there's a ruling by the Chief Justice, this is what it said, they always keep telling us. The Chief Justice said that the law didn't come through Parliament and reform and this, that,
but
that.
this is-
And the
he's
Chief Justice
wrong.
said,
Of course he's wrong.
He's wrong. You see,
what
this is the
happened?
problem.
What happened
He's
to the
wrong.
ruling? It came
It's-
from the highest court in Guyana's constitution, and what happened?
Could I remind everybody here that not so long ago, we were not allowed to go to court in pants. You remember that stupidness?
Yes.
Even lawyers could not go to court in pants. And people like, I think it was Josephine Whitehead and other lawyers said, well, you know, enough is enough. Foolishness again. And people all, you know, stood up there in their pants. But I remember having to appear before court and having to go round the corner to house and borrow a skirt and come. And then the other, it is just so totally ridiculous. So these are practices that have no bearing on the rule of law, has no bearing on justice, and they just need to be scotched. Going to the cultural center now, that's not even a law of court. You can't go with what they call in Ghana armless, you can't go to sleeveless, you can't go with jeans. What foolishness is this? You know, the country might be falling apart, but everybody got to
Yes,
go
prim
down
and
well
proper.
dressed. I mean, you know, come on.
Well, sorry, Mr. Magistrate. Even though that he said what he had to say, or I know he's at that city can imprison me or whatever, I was prepared for whatever he wanted to do, but he would not have made me change from female attire.
Good for you.
Let me go back to Justice Sachs. This is what he said, paragraph 4 of his ruling. In the pre-democratic era, again we're talking South Africa,
Right.
same-sex unions were not only denied any form of legal protection, they were regarded as immoral, and their consummation by men could attract imprisonment. Since the interim constitution came into force in 1994, however, the Bill of Rights has dramatically altered the situation. Section 9(1) of the Constitution now reads, everyone is equal before the law and has the right to equal protection and benefit of the law. That's all they needed.
And that is all.
And we have
say.
identical.
Yes,
We
exactly.
have parallel. We have
South Africa also is one of the first countries in the world to include sexual orientation
Yes.
as grounds in their non-discrimination clause. And it's instructive as well that actually the Constitution Reform Commission in 1999 paid a great deal of attention to the post-apartheid constitution of South Africa.
Yeah.
That's where a lot of these
Our
provisions
own
came
reform,
from.
yeah.
That particular provision that you've read there is in the Ghana constitution
the
because of
state
that
shall not
concept.
deny to any person equality before the law or equal protection and benefit of the law. The state, this is Ghana,
Right.
the state shall for the
Yes.
purpose of promoting equality take legislative and other measures designed to protect disadvantaged persons and persons with disabilities. It's there. South Africa, this whole basis of the South African is the 9(1) which says everyone is equal before the law and has the right to equal protection and benefit of the law.
Is that
That's-
in our? That is
we-
our wording.
No.
That is South
That's
African
South
wording. May
Africa.
I suggest
we've
that
taken the same wording.
that wording is all that is needed. You don't have to list
Yeah.
who is who
That's
and
correct.
who is not.
That's
In the Ghana
correct.
It is
Constitution.
You're
elegant,
confusing the matter.
it is clear, it is concise, and it is lawful.
But we don't know when are we going to have constitutional reform? I mean, look how
Yes.
long we've been waiting.
Well, we have to just press harder for it. I know that
Oh Lord.
Mr. Nigel Hughes and a number of eminent lawyers, in fact, the late Mr. Hasan Parvis, someone that I really appreciated, was on that committee. I don't know if I remember. I was invited to make comments or to make representation at something. I don't believe it is the actual Constitutional Commission
No,
itself.
this
It
is just a
what
procedure
is it?
to do with procedures, how
do
they
with-
will
To
go
set it
about
up
it.
and so
So
on.
whatever that is going on, I'm assuming it will come to closure soon. But then all of us here, and maybe to all of the people out there, Guyanese, please let us all step forward strongly and boldly for constitutional reform in Guyana.
My view, though, and I speak now as a lawyer, is that we already have it in the Constitution.
Well, I mean, agreed.
We do. We have it.
I don't think we have enough.
Well,
No, we actually have
I mean,
far more than South Africa
in other
does.
words, there is something in there that this current magistrate and other officers of the court are in fact not taking cognizance of. I
Definitely.
mean, that is what we're trying to say.
Definitely.
But, I like your point. I think Vanda mentions this. You need to take this up at the highest level of the court.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it doesn't always have to be, because our court system is adversarial, somebody wins and somebody loses.
And it's slow.
And there's
And
ego
very
and all
slow.
sorts of things. And
Yeah.
it's slow and it's
Takes
costly.
years. Yeah.
So I am sure our Chancellor would be willing to meet a delegation
Yes,
of
and
the
to fast track this thing, so
And-
it is
and
no
bring up this-
longer affording Guyanese discrimination at the hands of the court.
Yes, and when
Yeah.
a magistrate does that, he brings the court into disrepute. It's not you behaving improperly, it's the magistrate behaving improperly.
And that's I'm saying, Chris, the magistrate, maybe they're busy and they don't read enough or they're not up to date, but it is also the obligation of whatever section of our society, whether it is I don't know who is in charge of these judges and
The
magistrates.
Judicial Service
Well,
Commission.
the Judicial Service Commission should immediately move towards education, ongoing education,
Well, no, the
and
Judicial Service Commission is
updating.
responsible for appointment and
Well,
discipline.
but that is something you can ask the Chancellor. Mr.
yeah,
Chancellor, who is in charge of educating on a continuous basis?
They do
the
some
officers
training.
of
They
our
actually
court?
do some training.
But
Kind
Chris,
of
they
ad
need
hoc.
more.
Oh, yes.
Ad hoc.
They
No.
need more, and people, and I believe that tracking and evaluation is important. Parliament should be tracked and evaluated by a citizens' body that has the authority to do so, and the courts should be tracked and evaluated according to our conventions and our laws again. And annually, you have a report card on what is going on in terms of Guyana Parliament, the court, and I should say the health, both health and education, to what's going on there. Why not?
Yeah. I think that's an important part of the menu. Ongoing training and education for key stakeholders.
And
Police,
tracking, because it could be very educated and still not
Still not doing
upholding
what
the
it's
law. So
supposed
it
to
has
do.
to be tracked,
Yeah,
monitored,
closely monitored,
evaluated, and
continuously
stated as
monitored.
such. And
police,
stated as such.
magistrates, judges, at all levels.
Soldiers.
Public education,
Soldiers, indeed.
ministry official, all the uniformed
You
forces
go,
and so on.
I would suggest you have to engage persons who have taken positions that are very different from yours, like the evangelical community. You have to talk with them, because
Yeah.
that's how society kind of thrives,
Through dialogue.
when people can
And
dialogue.
you know, at one
Yeah.
point we had something called the national conversations that were going on. I was under the last government. I don't think either side really appreciated them, but I was part of that, and I found them to be extremely useful. You know, in the rural areas, some of
Yes.
the matters that were raised by regular John and Jane citizen was extremely interesting, actually, and more forward thinking than, you know, what you might find at some of the centers of our institutions and so on.
The social,
It's worth it. It's
the
worth
social
it.
cohesion ministry had also started a process of starting back some of those national conversations.
I don't know where it was.
And
Yes,
some of those
indeed.
discussions,
I don't know
and
where
they had
that
a
is
big
right now,
conference
but
and
there
so
was
on.
something. It needs to be
So we
followed
hope they need
through.
follow up.
Yeah.
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 What I would like to say before in closing, this issue is just one, but I would encourage the LGBT population of Ghana to speak out on these issues where discrimination, where your rights are being violated, where you can't live in your own community or maybe a house. Speak out to the relevant organization, take actions, don't just sit and, you know, take them and swallow them, because I do know the effects and they can also lead to suicide. So just speak out, talk,
Yes.
come to the organization. We have Ghana Trans United. This is a trans-focused organization. We're located in Thomas Street, Kitty. We also have our Facebook page where we can be contacted. Ghana Trans United, our Facebook page, and there's also a cell phone number where you can always call.
Would you like to
anytime.
say what the number is?
And the number is 674-8741.
Is
You
it
can
a
call.
hotline?
Yeah, it's also is a direct number. You can
Yeah.
call at any time to get
For
on
help.
and for help, especially as it relates to transgender issues. And just let the action keep going. Do not allow our rights to be violated. We're no longer in the 1990s, the 1970s, the 1980s. We're now in the 2000 millennium, and we should get what belongs to us. The people should not deny us anymore. We should fight for what ours. Don't sit down and don't wait, and don't just take it. Speak out. Go to SASOD. Come to GTU. See a friend. Tell somebody. Somebody will get help for you. Thank you.
Now,
Well,
after
I
that
think
very
that's it then.
emotional appeal,
And practical.
I don't think I'm going to ask anybody else to close.
That's the closing statement.
Twing to Van der Radzik, Joel Simpson. Thank you so much for appearing on Plain Talk.
Thank you for
Thank
Very,
having
you.
us.
Thank
very
you.
interesting discussion.
Thank you.
I can give you a copy of this decision if you
Yeah,
wish.
why not?
Operators and viewers, thank you, good night, and I'll see you next week.